I'm excited. An economic expert is now praising Bitcoin on TV at Welt as the best investment of all time. He says that Bitcoin is a crisis asset that can benefit massively, especially during times of unrest. And you should get into Bitcoin now. He clearly recommends a Bitcoin allocation here. I really enjoy being here when I criticize any TV reports, any people or wannabe experts on TV for how poorly they portray Bitcoin. But what we're seeing here is probably the most bullish TV statement about Bitcoin ever. I've never seen a TV expert say that Bitcoin is the best investment of all time. But what we are seeing here now is perhaps the most bullish TV Bitcoin statement ever seen. I've never seen a TV expert say that Bitcoin is the best investment of all time. Now let's see what the economic expert Holger Zschaepitz has to say about Bitcoin. That's unbelievable. There are also 1 or 2 points of criticism we need to address, but hats off to this TV report.
So we want to talk about this boom. Holger Zschaepitz, the economics editor at Welt, is here in the studio with me. Today, without the watch you usually have with you, Bitcoin is soaring. So why is Trump actually influencing the Bitcoin price so much and pushing it up after his re-election?
Yeah, Bitcoin is always a matter of supply and demand. Bitcoin supply is regulated and more investors raise the price. Reconsider Bitcoin's impact. And if more people just start investing in it, then it goes up. Maybe we should take another look at what this Bitcoin has done. I'd say this is the best investment of all time. Since 2010, we've been able to invest in it, and back then, Bitcoin cost 5 cents. Today, if we calculate it, that's 128 million% you could have made by investing in Bitcoin. And that comes out to 167 per year if you do the math. So almost a distribution since 2010, year after year. And it's just crazy what we're experiencing right now.
So he's really going all out here and making a strong bullish case for Bitcoin. It was better than silver, better than gold, better than stocks, better than real estate. And he also makes it clear that it's due to a limitation. We have a limited supply. And when at the same time, through BlackRock, through Trump, through a Bitcoin strategy, and through new gateways, money can flow into Bitcoin and demand increases, then he expects that we'll see a price escalation upwards. That's clearly the scenario you're laying out here. It also means that, as you're arguing here, we're going to see massively rising Bitcoin prices in the future.
Well, if we had known beforehand, we all would have done it, no question about that. It went way down again, and a lot of people lost money there. But can you explain again, what is Bitcoin? Is it something technical? Is it a cryptocurrency? What does that mean?
It's just an algorithm if you look at it that way. So, based on a fixed, rule-based system, the currency is simply created anew. And in a world where everything is falling apart, we've got martial law being enforced in South Korea. In France, the parliament is facing a vote of no confidence, and money is being printed here and there. Then there's this currency or cryptocurrency that operates on a fixed algorithm. You know exactly how much money is being created anew, and you know that it stops at 21 million bitcoins. In a world filled with distrust towards traditional currencies, this is just something you can rely on. We know exactly how much money will be created, and we know exactly that the limit will be 21 million bitcoins. In a world filled with distrust towards traditional currencies, this is something you can rely on. It emerged in 2008 during the financial crisis when banks were failing and money was being printed excessively. Someone proposed a stable cryptocurrency based on specific criteria, and it gained traction. Bitcoin is now used as digital gold to store money. If I'm not buying stocks and want a safe place for my money, I'll choose Bitcoin because it's a rule-based system, not subject to arbitrary changes. That's what makes it attractive. And people are using Bitcoin as a kind of digital gold to store their money. If I'm not buying stocks and just want to keep my money somewhere safe, I'll go with Bitcoin because I know no one's going to come along next week and say, oh, let me just print a bunch more of this. It's just a rule-based system. And that's what makes it so attractive right now.
So the more the dollar goes towards zero, the more the euro goes towards zero, and the more crisis scenarios we have in the world, the more Bitcoin benefits from it. We're seeing more and more money coming into circulation. The money supply is massively increasing again, and that also indicates a struggling economy. The more the economy is, let's say, in crisis, the more money you have to pump into it. This leads to bubble formation in various assets, like the real estate market, the stock market, and so on. Bitcoin is a counter-response here. It almost sounds like what he's saying here is straight out of Larry Fink and BlackRock's playbook, because he's basically adopted Larry Fink's argument that Bitcoin is an asset that benefits during a crisis. Of course, others say that too, but it really sounds like he might have watched a video or two from Larry Fink. But Larry Fink's argument is also massively accurate. Of course, others say that too, but it really sounds like he might have watched a video or two from Larry Fink. But Larry Fink's argument is also massively accurate. Sure, when there's a crisis scenario, Bitcoin often gets pulled down first. But Larry Fink's argument is also spot on. Of course, when there's a crisis scenario, Bitcoin often gets pulled down first. But we see that Bitcoin tends to recover faster in crises compared to traditional stocks or any traditional assets, ETFs, and so on. So it's definitely accurate to say that Bitcoin benefits from the crisis. But we see that Bitcoin tends to recover faster in crises compared to traditional stocks or any traditional assets, ETFs, tariffs and so on. And that's why the argument is definitely spot on that Bitcoin benefits from the crisis. Michael Saylor always mentions that Bitcoin is an asset. When we're going through tough times, when we have uncertain times, Bitcoin is the escape to quality. This is again the quote from Larry Fink, who says that Bitcoin is basically the lifeboat here, 2001 is the anchor, and more people are realizing, hey, the thing is hitting the wall, the Titanic is sinking. And then there's that fitting quote about how I've never known anyone who argued against a lifeboat on a sinking ship. And even if you don't get on the first lifeboat, even if you say, okay, I missed out at €1, at €10, at €100, and even if I still wasn't on board, I'll just jump in at €1 because the Titanic is going down. And if there are lifeboats available now, they're going to be around for a while, even up to 1 million, 2 million, and so on. And even if you don't get on the first lifeboat, even if you say, okay, I missed out at €1, at €10, at €100, and I still wasn't on board, I'll just jump in at €1 because the Titanic is sinking. And if there are lifeboats available now, those lifeboats are going to be around for a while, even up to 1 million, 2 million, and so on. As long as you can still exchange fiat money for Bitcoin, you can still hop on a lifeboat. It's only too late when you can no longer exchange fiat for Bitcoin. And as long as you can trade fiat for Bitcoin, Bitcoin is still massively undervalued. It's only too late when you can no longer exchange fiat money for Bitcoin. And as long as you can exchange fiat for Bitcoin, Bitcoin is still massively undervalued. And that's basically what I want to say here. There are lifeboats available. You can get on now, you should get on. And even if you weren't on the first lifeboat, it doesn't make sense to argue against the lifeboat when the Titanic is sinking.
You sound like a huge fan right now. It's worth mentioning that there are hundreds of other cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin, which is mined. But how safe are all these currencies? How safe is Bitcoin in particular?
Bitcoin hasn't been hacked even once so far. It's true that sometimes Bitcoins have been stolen from exchanges, but that has nothing to do with Bitcoin itself being hacked. And that's really a very safe thing. That's not the big problem you're talking about. Other currencies, but those other currencies are something else. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. That's really the only currency where no one is behind it. It's just an algorithm. And when you look at others like Ethereum or Solana or whatever, there are actually players behind them who want to make money off of it. And the amount of Bitcoin, the number of things, isn't limited either. So in that sense, Bitcoin is something entirely its own.
It's really important to distinguish between Bitcoin and crypto, especially now that all these shitcoins are popping up again and the altcoin cycle is fully kicking in. You can always gamble here, you can speculate with altcoins. Go ahead, burn your fingers, maybe even pull out some massive gains, but be ready for the fact that Bitcoin and crypto are not comparable. Bitcoin has no company, no CEO, no foundation behind it. There are no gurus behind it. Of course, there are people like Michael Saylor and so on, but there's no one who can just stop the blockchain like it has happened with some other coins. They just say, okay, oops, we stopped the blockchain. Oh, we're making a consensus algorithm change and so on. That kind of thing isn't possible with Bitcoin, so you really can't lump Bitcoin in with crypto. You have to keep them clearly separated. They just say, okay, oops, we stopped the blockchain. Oh, we're making a consensus algorithm change and so on. So what's not possible with Bitcoin means you really can't lump it in with crypto. You have to keep them clearly separated. And this separation makes it very clear and very right.
A lot of people are thinking, hey, maybe I should do it like with some stocks, even though the price is already so high. Is it worth jumping in now? Or are we at a point where expectations are high and it might go downhill after that?
At some point, it's definitely going to go downhill. The question is, if you look at the previous cycles, the Bitcoin would have to go up again, and then it would crash again. So it's definitely not for people who say they can't risk a loss, but for those who might have some extra cash and just want to be part of it. You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin, you can buy fractions of it, and these days it's really easy to do that through an ETF, so you can definitely get in on it. And you always have to ask yourself, will there be more people involved with Bitcoin in 6 months than there are now? You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin, you can buy fractions of it. These days, it's really easy to do that through an ETF, so you can definitely get in on it. And you always have to ask yourself, will there be more people involved with Bitcoin in 6 months than there are now? And when I hear a lot of investors in America saying, oh, I'm not in on that. And in America, it's really being allowed now as an asset class in 2021, which could lead to a huge demand. And we talked about it at the beginning, the supply is limited, that's a given, and if the demand keeps rising, the price will go back up. It's a really simple supply and demand game, and not being in on it. I mean, I'd say I have about 2 to 3% of my portfolio in this currency, and if I were to lose it all, which you can never rule out, it wouldn't be a huge deal. You shouldn't bet the farm, but you should definitely have a small stake in it to be part of the game.
21, the casino is open. Holger Zschaepitz, thank you for coming to the studio.
Yeah, the host doesn't seem too convinced. He's talking about casinos and stuff. There were some really important statements made here. So Zschaepitz made some really good points here, especially at the beginning, but towards the end, he got a bit weaker because he brought up some things that aren't quite 100% accurate anymore. He's talking about declines, 150 cycle tops. Sure, there will always be pullbacks, and it's likely we'll go back into a bear market 2021. A lot of people are currently assuming that since BlackRock, MicroStrategy, and others are buying so much Bitcoin, we won't see any more bear markets. That's probably a bit of a stretch. There will definitely be longer phases, like a year or two, where things calm down again and so on. But we need to look at this. He's talking about cycle tops. If you take the last cycles into account, It would mean that from the last cycle top, we've only seen about a quadrupling or something like that, so just barely a doubling. But if we look at the last cycles, we always had 5-fold, 10-fold, sometimes more than 10-fold increases. If we average the last 3 cycles, we exceed expectations. Consider different cycles. The first cycle extrapolates to over 1 million, the second is lower, and so on. Averaging the last 2 or 3 cycles consistently results in Bitcoin prices over $1 million. Even the last cycle, though I can't recall the exact number, was more than a tripling. Extrapolating old cycles is too low. And even if we take the last cycle into account, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it was definitely more than a quadrupling. So, if we extrapolate the old cycles, that's definitely too low. You'd have to correct that to at least 300, maybe even 4, upwards. And then it could also be that there are pullbacks again. I'm not necessarily assuming that. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but if you're going to extrapolate, you need to do it right. I'm also going more with my gut feeling, like JPG says, because I actually expect some diminishing returns. I don't think we're entering a super cycle now, where the cycle gets even stronger than maybe the last 3 cycles on average, or something like that. He also mentions that ETFs are pretty easy to acquire. I don't think we're entering a super cycle now, where the cycle gets even stronger than maybe the last 3 cycles on average, or something like that. He also says that ETFs are pretty easy to acquire. You can now easily acquire Bitcoin through ETFs. And you can also buy fractions with ETFs. It's really important to mention that you can not only buy fractions with ETFs, but you can also buy Satoshis. For example, spots. You can easily sign up with 21 Bitcoin, one of the easiest apps in Europe to buy Bitcoin. Absolutely, it's super easy. I'll put a link down here for you. Here, you even get a discount with the code Bitcoin Hotel. And here, you can even buy Satoshis. The whole app is even denominated in Satoshis. So you're not really buying Bitcoin here, you're buying Satoshis. 1 million, 10 million Satoshis, or even 1 billion Satoshis. But you're not really buying Bitcoin here, you're always buying fractions. And that's really, really important to keep in mind, especially for newcomers. 100 million Satoshis make up 1 Bitcoin, and they're kind of like the pennies to the dollar, the subunit. And then he made some bullish statements here, saying that Bitcoin is the best investment of all time. And in the end, he recommends a 2 to 3% allocation. I almost have to wonder if he's kind of underrating the whole thing here. Because if it's the best investment and he's assuming that it can't be manipulated, can't be censored, and has never been hacked. He listed all the advantages here, but then he only recommends allocating 2 to 3%. That doesn't make any sense because other investments underperform compared to Bitcoin over the long term, at least when we look at the past. Other assets have third-party risks. There's CEO risk, country risk, issuer risk, and so on. With Bitcoin, those risks are clearly not there. He makes that very clear, but then he doesn't conclude that you could potentially position higher allocations in Bitcoin. I mean, what he says is right. Even if you only put in small, let's say, chunks, you're definitely in the game. There's definitely no 1,000 when it comes to Bitcoin. He makes that very clear. But then he doesn't conclude that you could potentially position higher allocations in Bitcoin. I mean, what he's saying is right. Even if you only put in small, let's say, chunks, you're definitely in the game. You should definitely have a foot in the door with Bitcoin, and there's nothing wrong with a small allocation. I mean, what he's saying is right. Even if you only put in small, let's say, chunks, you're definitely in the game. You should definitely have a foot in the door with Bitcoin, and there's nothing wrong with a small allocation. I don't want to misrepresent this. You have to say he's on public television, so you can't just say, okay, go all in with credit and so on. I'm not saying that either. Everyone needs an allocation that makes sense for them. It's really individual. Not having any allocation here is reckless. You need to be covered. Wealth managers are starting to realize this. You need at least a 2% allocation to avoid looking like a bad wealth manager, saying, I missed the party. Wealth managers are starting to notice this too. If Bitcoin could really explode massively, and the chances aren't zero, then you need at least a 2% allocation so you don't end up looking like a bad wealth manager later on, saying, hey, sorry, I missed the party. Because at least you can say, hey, I might not have fully understood it, but I had at least 2% in the game and I was part of the party. And that's why it's really, really important to keep this in mind. That was really the only big criticism. When you make such bold statements and reference people like Michael Saylor and Larry Fink, but then on the other hand say, okay, just a 2 to 3% allocation, it just doesn't add up. But otherwise, big praise here. By the way, he also does very, very cool analyses. I always check out his Twitter account or his X account. He really does some great economic analyses and statistics about how Germany is crashing and how Europe is crashing. It's really impressive stuff, so definitely check him out. I'll drop a link for you below. And one really important thing, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We really need to push the channel now so that Bitcoin is truly understood, because this is really the time when a lot of new people are coming into the Bitcoin space, and it's super important that they get the right information. 2001, you really can't afford to miss out on this story, or let's say, this innovation that's happening right now. You really have to be fully aware of what's going on here because what's happening right now is truly a part of financial history. And Bitcoin, as Holger Zschaepitz already said, is the best investment of all time. Until then, peace out.